Long before cities rose, and long before memory learned how to record itself, there was a time when the world seemed to awaken under unseen hands. Rivers changed their courses as if guided. Stars were named before humanity understood numbers, and order emerged where chaos should have ruled. Legends speak of a moment when beings not born of Earth walked among humans and shaped the foundations of civilization itself. Why did humanity suddenly learn to build, to measure, to write, to remember? Why do the earliest stories speak not of gradual progress, but of instruction, command, and divine intervention? Why do the oldest texts insist that knowledge was given, not discovered? And why do these stories, separated by millennia, echo one another across cultures that never met? Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. Long before cities bore names or kings claimed thrones, the land between the great rivers existed in a state both fertile and unforgiving. The Tigris and Euphrates did not flow gently. They surged, shifted, and carved the earth with a will of their own. Floods could arrive without warning, swallowing fields and homes in a single night, while years of drought could turn once fertile plains into cracked wastelands. To survive in such a place required more than instinct. It demanded structure, memory, coordination, and an understanding of forces far greater than any single human life. It was here, in this unstable landscape, that the first great experiment of civilization took form. Long before stone temples or written laws, communities learned to observe the rhythms of water, sky, and soil. They learned that survival depended on cooperation, planning, and obedience to patterns that seemed to exist beyond human control. Over time, these patterns became personified. They were no longer merely floods or storms or fertile seasons. They became presences, wills, intelligences. The earliest inhabitants of this land did not imagine themselves alone in the universe. They believed they were living within a system designed and governed by powers older and greater than themselves. These powers were later called the Anunnaki. In the earliest Sumerian understanding, they were not distant abstractions, but active forces shaping daily life. The word itself carried weight, those of royal seed, offspring of heaven and earth. To speak of them was to speak of order itself, of the unseen architecture holding the world together. They were not distant creators who vanished after creation. They were present, involved, demanding, and watchful. The people who first spoke of the Anunnaki lived in a world without written history, yet their memory was long. Stories passed from mouth to ear across generations, refined and reinforced by ritual. When writing finally emerged, pressed into clay with reed styluses, these stories became fixed, no longer fluid myths, but records of a remembered past. What they recorded was not a vague creation tale, but a structured account of how civilization itself came to be. In these earliest accounts, humanity does not rise gradually through trial and error. Humanity appears suddenly, fashioned with purpose. Before humans existed, the world was already ordered but unfinished. The land was fertile, yet untended. Rivers flowed without direction. The gods themselves labored to maintain balance, digging channels, raising embankments, shaping the terrain. This labor was exhausting, and resentment grew among the lesser divine beings tasked with maintaining the world's infrastructure. The texts describe a time when the gods themselves grew weary. The younger deities, burdened with endless toil, rebelled against their superiors. Their uprising was not philosophical, but practical. They were tired of work. This rebellion forced a reckoning among the higher gods. The universe, as it was structured, was unsustainable. Something had to change. The solution was not mercy, but efficiency. A new being would be created, one capable of labor, endurance, and obedience. This being would relieve the gods of their burdens and maintain the world in their stead. Thus, humanity was conceived not as an accident, nor as a reward, but as a function within a cosmic system. The act of creation was deliberate and ritualized. According to the ancient accounts, a god was sacrificed so that divine essence could be mixed with clay. This fusion produced beings that were neither fully divine nor fully earthly. Humans inherited physical weakness and mortality from the clay, and consciousness, intelligence, and will from the divine essence. This dual nature defined humanity from its first breath, capable of thought and creativity, yet bound to labor and decay. From the beginning, humans were designed to work. They were taught to dig canals, cultivate fields, tend animals, and maintain the infrastructure that allowed civilization to function. The gods did not merely command from afar. They instructed, corrected, and supervised. Temples were not symbolic centers, but operational hubs where divine authority intersected with human labor. To serve the gods was not only a religious act, it was the foundation of society itself. As human communities expanded, so too did their awareness of order. They observed patterns in the heavens and learned to mark time by the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. These observations were not abstract curiosities. They were essential tools for survival. Floods followed celestial cycles. Seasons returned according to predictable rhythms. By learning these patterns, humans aligned themselves more closely with the divine order they believed governed all things. Out of this alignment came the earliest sciences. Astronomy, mathematics, and agriculture emerged not as isolated disciplines, but as sacred knowledge. To measure a field or calculate a calendar was to participate in divine logic. The priests who mastered these skills were not merely scholars, they were intermediaries between heaven and earth. As settlements grew into cities, each developed a patron deity, a divine guardian who embodied the city's identity and purpose. These gods were not abstract ideals, but living presences believed to dwell within their temples. The city thrived when its god was honored and declined when that relationship was neglected. Political authority flowed directly from divine favor. Kings ruled not by personal ambition, but by mandate, chosen to enforce cosmic order on earth. Yet the relationship between humans and the divine was never simple. The gods were powerful but temperamental. They could be generous one moment and destructive the next. Floods, droughts, plagues. These were interpreted not as random disasters but as signs of divine displeasure. To understand the will of the gods became the central task of society. Divination, omens, and ritual interpretation formed an entire intellectual class devoted to reading the intentions of unseen forces. Despite this uncertainty, humanity endured. Cities grew larger, walls higher, cultures more complex. Writing evolved from simple accounting marks into full literary expression. Hymns, prayers, and myths were recorded, preserving collective memory across generations. Through writing, the deeds of gods and humans alike became immortal. What began as a practical solution to divine labor became something far greater. Humanity developed consciousness of itself as a species with a past, a purpose, and a destiny. The Anunnaki were not merely gods who created humans, they were the framework through which humanity understood its place in the cosmos. In this world, existence was a partnership, unequal, demanding, but meaningful. Humans worked, built, and suffered, but they also created beauty, law, and knowledge. The gods governed, but they also depended on human devotion to sustain their power. Civilization itself became the product of this uneasy alliance. Thus, long before empires rose or history was written in ink, the foundations of human civilization were laid through a relationship defined by duty, reverence, and survival. The story of what came after the Anunnaki arrived is not merely a tale of gods and myths. It is the story of how humanity learned to exist within a vast and ordered universe, shaped by forces both seen and unseen. As human settlements expanded along the rivers, the relationship between people and the unseen powers governing their world grew increasingly structured. What had once been instinctive reverence became organized belief. The divine was no longer an abstract presence felt in storms or harvests, but a complex hierarchy with names, roles, rivalries, and jurisdictions. Each force of nature was understood as a conscious entity with desires, preferences, and authority. In this evolving worldview, the universe was not chaotic but bureaucratic, ruled by an intricate system of divine governance mirrored in human society. At the apex of this cosmic order stood the great gods, whose authority extended over heaven, earth, and the unseen realms below. They were not omnipotent in the later theological sense, but their power was immense and undeniable. They controlled the winds, the rains, fertility, and fate itself. Beneath them existed ranks of lesser deities, spirits, and divine functionaries, each responsible for a specific domain. The structure of the cosmos mirrored the structure of the emerging city-states, layered, hierarchical, and ruled by decree. Humanity occupied a defined position within this system. People were not equals of the gods, nor were they insignificant. They were essential workers within a divine economy. Their labor sustained the temples, which in turn sustained the gods. Their rituals fed divine power, and their obedience preserved cosmic order. Every offering, every prayer, every carefully performed rite was part of an ongoing exchange that bound humans and deities together. The temples became the focal points of this relationship. Massive structures of brick and stone rose from the plains, dominating the skyline of early cities. These were not simply places of worship, but administrative centers, storehouses, and symbols of divine presence. Within their walls, priests maintained daily rituals that were believed to sustain the universe itself. Food offerings were prepared with precision, incense burned at exact times, hymns sung in prescribed rhythms. Nothing was left to chance, because error could invite disaster. Priests were not mystics detached from daily life. They were administrators, scholars, and scientists. They kept records of harvests, tracked celestial movements, and interpreted omens. Their authority came not only from tradition, but from knowledge of cycles, symbols, and sacred formulas passed down through generations. Writing became a sacred act, for to inscribe a word was to fix it into the fabric of reality. As cities expanded, so too did the complexity of divine administration. Each city revered its own patron deity, believed to reside physically within the temple at its center. These gods were thought to defend their cities in times of war, to bless their fields, and to judge their people. Loyalty to one's city was inseparable from loyalty to its god. Political conflicts were therefore also theological conflicts, battles between divine wills expressed through human armies. This worldview gave meaning to suffering and disaster. When famine struck or enemies breached the walls, it was not random misfortune, but the result of divine displeasure or cosmic imbalance. The task of the priesthood was to diagnose the cause: a broken oath, a neglected ritual, an offense committed unknowingly. Through sacrifice, prayer, and ritual purification, balance could be restored. The idea of justice was deeply tied to this cosmic order. Justice was not abstract fairness, but alignment with divine law. To act justly was to act in accordance with the will of the gods. Kings were judged not by compassion or popularity, but by their ability to maintain order, protect the temples, and uphold divine law. Their authority came from the heavens, and their failures were seen as signs of divine withdrawal. Within this system, humanity's origin story carried profound meaning. The belief that humans were created to relieve the gods of labor explained both human suffering and human purpose. Work was not a curse, but a sacred duty. Labor was how humans fulfilled their role in the cosmic design. Through work, they sustained the world and honored the powers that made existence possible. Yet this worldview was not without tension. Humans were created to serve, but they were also endowed with intelligence, creativity, and ambition. Over time, these qualities led to innovation, ambition, and occasionally defiance. As cities grew wealthier and more complex, the line between divine authority and human agency became blurred. Kings began to claim semi-divine status. Some were declared sons of gods, others were deified after death. Power increasingly flowed through human institutions rather than directly from divine intervention. This shift did not go unnoticed in myth. Stories began to emerge of gods displeased with humanity's noise, arrogance, or overpopulation. These narratives expressed anxiety over the growing independence of human society. In them, the gods considered drastic measures to restore balance, including destruction on a massive scale. Such stories served as moral warnings, reminders that humanity's prosperity depended on restraint and reverence. Despite these tensions, the relationship between gods and humans remained reciprocal. The gods needed humans to maintain temples, offer sacrifices, and preserve their names through ritual and story. Humans needed the gods for protection, fertility, and cosmic order. This mutual dependence created a fragile equilibrium that defined ancient life. Over time, the memory of direct divine involvement faded. The gods became more distant, their presence mediated through priesthoods and traditions. Yet their influence remained embedded in law, architecture, and daily custom. Even as empires rose and fell, the foundational belief in a divinely ordered universe persisted. This belief shaped how people understood history itself. Events were not random, they were expressions of divine will. Victory and defeat, prosperity and famine were interpreted as messages from the gods. History was a dialogue between heaven and earth, written through human action. Within this worldview, memory held immense power. To remember was to preserve order. To forget was to invite chaos. This is why stories were told and retold, why myths were preserved with such care. They were not entertainment, but instruction, not fantasy, but truth as understood through the lens of experience and belief. As generations passed, these stories accumulated, layered upon one another like sediment. Each generation added interpretation, emphasis, and context, yet the core remained intact. The earliest memories of divine creation and human purpose persisted, shaping the identity of civilizations long after their original authors were gone. Thus, the world that emerged after the arrival of the divine was not static. It evolved, adapted, and endured. Human beings learned to live within a universe governed by forces beyond their control, yet open to their participation. They learned that survival required cooperation, wisdom, and respect for powers greater than themselves. In this world, the boundary between the sacred and the mundane was thin. Every action had meaning. Every choice echoed beyond the individual. The divine was not distant or abstract, but woven into the fabric of daily life. And it was within this framework that the foundations of civilization were laid, setting the stage for all that would follow. As generations passed and cities expanded across the fertile plains, the relationship between humanity and the divine grew increasingly structured, codified into systems that governed every aspect of existence. What had once been fluid interactions between humans and gods became formalized through ritual, hierarchy, and law. The world was no longer shaped only by raw divine will, but by a carefully maintained order that reflected both cosmic design and human administration. At the center of this evolving world stood the temple complex, not merely as a place of worship, but as the heart of economic, political, and intellectual life. These complexes dominated city landscapes, rising above homes and marketplaces as visible symbols of divine authority. Inside, priests managed vast estates, supervised laborers, oversaw trade, and recorded transactions on clay tablets. The temple was a living institution, both sacred and practical, embodying the union of heaven and earth. The gods were believed to reside physically within their temples. Their statues were not symbolic representations, but living vessels inhabited by divine presence. Each morning, priests performed rituals to awaken the god, wash and dress the statue, and present food and drink. These offerings were not symbolic gestures, but necessities. The gods required sustenance just as humans did. In return, they offered protection, fertility, and order. Neglecting these rituals was considered dangerous, an invitation to chaos. This belief reinforced a worldview in which divine and human realms were deeply interdependent. The gods relied on humans for worship and sustenance, while humans relied on divine favor for survival. Neither could exist without the other. This mutual dependence shaped every aspect of social organization, from agriculture to kingship. Kings, in particular, occupied a unique position within this cosmic structure. They were not gods, but they were chosen by the gods. Their authority did not stem from popular consent, but from divine appointment. Inscriptions often described kings as shepherds appointed to guide their people, protect the weak, and uphold justice. A king who failed in these duties risked divine wrath manifested through famine, defeat, or rebellion. Yet kings were also human, subject to fear, ambition, and error. This tension between divine mandate and human limitation runs throughout Mesopotamian thought. Kings boasted of their achievements, but they also acknowledged their dependence on divine favor. In inscriptions, victories were credited to the gods, while failures were often attributed to insufficient piety or ritual error. The divine order extended beyond politics into the fabric of daily life. Every activity, from farming to marriage, was believed to fall under the influence of specific deities. The success of a harvest depended on the favor of the fertility gods. Childbirth required the blessing of divine midwives. Illness was interpreted as the result of spiritual imbalance or divine displeasure. As a result, ritual permeated everyday existence. This worldview shaped the way people understood suffering. Illness, misfortune, and disaster were not random events, but messages that demanded interpretation. Diviners and exorcists played crucial roles in diagnosing the causes of misfortune. Through omens, dreams, and ritual readings, they sought to uncover which god had been offended and what actions were required to restore harmony. The complexity of this system reflected a deep belief in cosmic order. The universe was not chaotic, even when it seemed cruel. Everything had a cause, and every effect could, in theory, be traced back to a disruption in the divine-human relationship. This belief gave meaning to suffering, even if it offered little comfort. Over time, these ideas crystallized into a sophisticated theological framework. The gods were no longer just powerful beings, but embodiments of fundamental principles. Enlil represented authority and command. Enki embodied wisdom and creativity. Inanna personified desire and transformation, and Shamash stood for justice and truth. Each god represented a facet of existence, and together they formed a complete vision of the cosmos. Humanity's role within this system was both humble and significant. Humans were not meant to challenge the gods, but neither were they insignificant. Through proper behavior, ritual observance, and moral conduct, humans could maintain harmony with the divine order. This belief fostered a sense of responsibility that extended beyond individual life toward the stability of the entire world. Over centuries, these ideas were refined and preserved through storytelling, ritual, and writing. Myths were not static tales, but living frameworks, retold and reinterpreted to address changing circumstances. As cities rose and fell, as dynasties came and went, the core narratives adapted while retaining their essential meaning. The emergence of writing transformed these traditions. What had once been oral lore became fixed in clay, granting permanence to belief. Scribes became the guardians of memory, preserving not only economic records, but also hymns, prayers, and myths. Writing allowed the past to speak directly to the future, ensuring continuity across generations. With time, the accumulated weight of tradition created a sense of destiny. Humanity was no longer merely reacting to the whims of nature, but participating in an ongoing cosmic drama. Each generation inherited both the burden and the privilege of maintaining order in a world shaped by divine design. This worldview did not eliminate fear or suffering, but it provided a framework within which they could be understood. Natural disasters were not meaningless tragedies, but expressions of imbalance. Moral failure had cosmic consequences. Human action mattered because it resonated beyond the individual, affecting the harmony of the entire world. In this context, memory became sacred. Remembering the deeds of the gods, the foundations of cities, and the lessons of the past was essential to preserving order. Forgetting, by contrast, was dangerous. To forget was to risk repeating the mistakes that once brought chaos. Thus, the preservation of knowledge became a moral duty. Scribes meticulously copied ancient texts, ensuring that wisdom survived even as cities fell. Through their efforts, the voices of the past spoke to the future, bridging generations across centuries. As this tradition matured, it shaped not only how people understood the gods, but how they understood themselves. Humans were not merely subjects of divine will. They were participants in a cosmic system that required their cooperation. They were both creators and caretakers, bound by duty and empowered by purpose. This vision of the world did not promise eternal reward or personal salvation. Instead, it offered meaning through participation in something greater than oneself. Life was finite, but its impact could endure through deeds, memory, and contribution to the cosmic order. In this way, the ancient understanding of existence forged a resilient culture capable of withstanding centuries of change. The gods might shift in name and form, empires might rise and fall, but the underlying principles endured. Order, duty, memory, and meaning remained the foundations upon which civilization stood. Thus, long after the first cities rose from the riverbanks, the legacy of those early beliefs continued to shape human thought. The world that followed was not merely inherited from the gods. It was built through the ongoing dialogue between the divine and the human, a dialogue written in clay, preserved in stone, and remembered across the ages. As centuries passed, the balance between divine authority and human agency continued to evolve, shaped by changing political realities and shifting understandings of power. The gods remained ever present in thought and ritual, yet their influence increasingly flowed through human institutions rather than direct intervention. Kings, priests, and scribes became the living conduits of divine will, mediating between heaven and earth through law, ritual, and memory. The rise of organized kingship marked a turning point in how humanity understood its place in the cosmic order. Early rulers were not merely administrators, they were symbols of stability in a world perpetually threatened by chaos. Their legitimacy rested on the belief that they had been chosen by the gods, not through conquest alone, but through destiny. Inscriptions repeatedly emphasize that kingship descended from heaven, reinforcing the idea that political authority was not a human invention, but a sacred trust. These early kings did not claim divinity in the modern sense. Instead, they portrayed themselves as servants of the gods, tasked with maintaining justice, protecting the weak, and ensuring the prosperity of the land. Their authority was conditional. A king who failed in his duties risked divine punishment, expressed through famine, defeat, or rebellion. This belief acted as both a restraint and a justification for power. Law became the visible expression of divine order. Legal codes were not merely collections of rules, but manifestations of cosmic justice. When a king issued laws, he did so in the name of the gods, presenting himself as the instrument through which divine will was enacted on earth. Justice was not abstract fairness, but alignment with sacred order. To violate the law was not simply to break a rule, it was to disrupt the balance of the universe. This worldview profoundly shaped daily life. Ordinary people understood their actions as part of a larger moral structure. Farming, marriage, trade, and worship were not separate spheres, but interconnected responsibilities governed by divine principles. Even mundane tasks carried spiritual weight. To till the soil was to participate in the divine act of sustaining creation. To raise a family was to continue the sacred lineage of humanity. Yet this sense of order existed alongside an awareness of fragility. The same gods who granted fertility and protection could withdraw their favor without warning. Floods, droughts, disease, and invasion were constant threats, interpreted as signs of divine displeasure. This fostered a worldview steeped in caution and humility. Prosperity was never taken for granted. It was seen as a temporary gift requiring constant maintenance through ritual and moral conduct. Over time, the complexity of religious practice grew. Specialized priests emerged to interpret omens, read the stars, and diagnose spiritual causes of misfortune. Divination became a science in its own right, involving intricate systems of interpretation. The flight of birds, the shape of a liver, the pattern of oil on water, each was believed to reveal the intentions of the gods. Nothing was random. Everything carried meaning. This intense focus on interpretation reflects a deeper belief that the universe was intelligible, that its workings could be understood through careful observation and knowledge passed down through generations. The cosmos was not chaotic, but governed by laws, even if those laws were inscrutable to the untrained eye. To understand the world was to participate in its order. As these beliefs solidified, the mythic past became a reference point for present action. Stories of creation, divine conflict, and human origin were not distant legends, but living frameworks that explained current events. When a city prospered, it was seen as proof of divine favor. When it fell, the fall was interpreted as a moral lesson, a warning etched into history. The memory of earlier ages, when gods walked among humans, when creation itself was shaped, served as both inspiration and caution. These stories reminded people that the world they inhabited was not permanent or guaranteed. It had been built through effort, sacrifice, and divine will, and it could be unmade just as easily. This awareness fostered a deep respect for tradition. Rituals were preserved with precision because they were believed to sustain cosmic stability. Innovation was approached cautiously, often framed as restoration rather than change. Even as societies evolved, they sought legitimacy by anchoring new practices in ancient precedent. Yet beneath this reverence for tradition lay a subtle recognition of human agency. The very act of recording laws, myths, and rituals implied an understanding that knowledge could be preserved and transmitted. Writing transformed memory into permanence. Through it, the past could instruct the future, and human experience could transcend the limits of a single lifetime. The emergence of writing also introduced a new form of power, the power of interpretation. Those who could read and write controlled access to divine knowledge. Scribes became guardians of tradition, mediators between the spoken word and the eternal record. Their work shaped how stories were remembered and how meanings evolved. Over generations, these written traditions accumulated layers of interpretation. Stories were copied, edited, and adapted to new contexts. Yet their core themes endured: creation from chaos, the establishment of order, the responsibilities of humanity, and the fragile balance between divine will and human action. Through this process, the early worldview of the river civilizations matured into a coherent philosophy of existence. Life was seen as purposeful but precarious, guided by forces beyond human control, yet responsive to human behavior. The universe was not indifferent. It watched, judged, and responded. This understanding fostered both humility and resilience. People accepted suffering as part of a larger pattern, but they also believed in the possibility of restoring balance through proper conduct. In this way, the myths provided not only explanations, but also guidance for living. As centuries passed, empires rose and fell, each inheriting and reshaping this worldview. Though languages changed and cities crumbled, the core ideas persisted, transmitted through stories, rituals, and texts. The names of the gods might shift, but their functions remained recognizable. The structure of the cosmos, once imagined by the earliest city dwellers, continued to shape human thought long after their cities had turned to dust. This enduring legacy reveals the true significance of those early beliefs. They were not merely attempts to explain natural phenomena, but frameworks for understanding existence itself. They offered a way to live with uncertainty, to find meaning in hardship, and to situate human life within a vast, ordered universe. By embedding moral and cosmic order into every aspect of life, these early cultures created a worldview that could sustain complex societies over millennia. Their stories, preserved through painstaking effort, became the foundation upon which later civilizations built their own understandings of law, morality, and destiny. In this way, the ancient vision of the world did not vanish with the fall of its cities. It endured, reshaped, and reinterpreted, influencing generations far removed from its origin. The belief that the universe is structured, purposeful, and responsive to human action remains one of the most enduring legacies of the first civilizations. And so, long after the temples crumbled and the names of kings were forgotten, the ideas born in the earliest cities continued to shape how humanity understood itself and its place in the cosmos. The world that emerged from those early myths was not merely inherited, it was continually reimagined, sustained by memory, belief, and the enduring human search for meaning. As generations passed and the ancient cities endured the rise and fall of kings, the relationship between humanity and the divine continued to evolve, shaped not only by belief but by experience. The world remained unpredictable, yet patterns emerged in the chaos, patterns that humans sought to understand, record, and master. Through this pursuit, a deeper sense of responsibility took hold, one that extended beyond ritual obedience and into the realm of moral order. The divine was no longer perceived solely as an external force imposing its will upon humanity. Instead, the gods became increasingly entwined with the moral fabric of society. Their favor was believed to rest not merely on offerings, but on justice, restraint, and the maintenance of balance. A ruler who oppressed his people or ignored the laws risked more than rebellion. He risked cosmic disorder. In this way, ethics became inseparable from theology. This shift is visible in the way laws were recorded and preserved. Legal codes were not private decrees, but public declarations, displayed for all to see. They did not claim to invent justice, but to reveal it, presenting laws as reflections of divine truth rather than human preference. The king stood as an intermediary, responsible for interpreting and enforcing this higher order. To rule unjustly was to invite disaster, not only politically, but cosmically. Within this framework, the role of the individual became more clearly defined. Every person, regardless of status, had obligations. to the gods, to the community, and to the natural order. The poor and the powerful alike were bound by expectations of conduct. While society remained hierarchical, there was an emerging recognition that even kings were subject to divine law. This belief created a moral structure that transcended personal authority. As cities expanded and populations grew, the need for stability intensified. The unpredictability of nature, combined with the fragility of human life, fostered a deep concern with fate and destiny. People sought to understand whether their lives were predetermined or shaped by choice. Diviners, astrologers, and priests attempted to read the will of the gods in the movement of stars, the behavior of animals, and the patterns of dreams. These interpretations were not mere superstition. They formed a system through which people navigated uncertainty. Dreams, in particular, were considered channels of divine communication. They were carefully recorded and analyzed, believed to carry warnings or guidance from the gods. A dream could foretell danger, promise success, or reveal hidden truths. To ignore such messages was considered reckless. In this way, the boundary between the waking world and the divine realm remained porous, constantly shifting. At the same time, humanity's growing self-awareness brought new tensions. People began to question why suffering existed, why the innocent endured hardship, and why the gods sometimes seemed indifferent. These questions did not lead to rebellion against the divine order, but to deeper reflection on the nature of existence. Suffering was increasingly interpreted as a test, a consequence of imbalance, or a necessary aspect of life's design. The stories preserved from this era reflect a nuanced understanding of the human condition. Heroes were not flawless. They struggled, failed, and faced the consequences of their actions. Even those favored by the gods experienced loss and hardship. Through these narratives, the ancient world grappled with the limits of power and the inevitability of mortality. One of the most profound realizations to emerge was the acceptance of death as an unchangeable aspect of existence. While earlier myths entertained the possibility of immortality, later traditions acknowledged that eternal life belonged to the gods alone. Humans, no matter how virtuous or accomplished, were destined to die. This realization did not lead to despair, but to a renewed emphasis on legacy. What mattered was not escaping death, but leaving behind something enduring. Thus, great importance was placed on memory and remembrance. To be remembered was to continue existing in some form. Names carved in stone, stories passed down, and achievements recorded in writing ensured that one's life extended beyond the grave. This belief gave rise to monumental architecture, elaborate tombs, and detailed inscriptions intended to preserve identity across generations. At the same time, this emphasis on legacy reinforced social responsibility. Actions mattered because they shaped how one would be remembered. Honor, integrity, and contribution to the community became measures of a life well lived. Even kings were subject to judgment by history, their reputations preserved or condemned by the records they left behind. The divine order, once perceived as distant and inscrutable, became intertwined with human experience. The gods were still powerful, but they were also bound by patterns and principles. They responded to justice, respected balance, and upheld cosmic law. This made the universe intelligible, if not always predictable. Through this evolving understanding, humanity found a sense of purpose within a vast and often indifferent cosmos. The world was no longer seen as chaotic or arbitrary, but structured by principles that could be learned, honored, and upheld. Knowledge became a sacred pursuit, and wisdom a form of devotion. As centuries passed, these beliefs solidified into traditions that guided entire civilizations. They influenced how people governed, how they worshipped, how they understood life and death. The ancient world did not view itself as separate from the divine, but as an integral part of a living, ordered whole. This worldview fostered resilience. Even in times of disaster, people believed that meaning could be found, that order would eventually be restored. The memory of past destructions and renewals reinforced the belief that chaos was never permanent. Renewal always followed collapse. In this sense, the ancient understanding of the cosmos was not pessimistic but profoundly hopeful. It acknowledged suffering without surrendering to it. It accepted mortality while affirming the value of human effort. It recognized the power of the gods, but also the dignity of human participation in the unfolding of the world. The legacy of this worldview would shape civilizations long after the names of its original thinkers were forgotten. Its influence would echo through religious traditions, philosophical systems, and cultural narratives across millennia. The belief that life has meaning, that order can be restored, and that humanity plays a role in maintaining the balance of the cosmos remains one of the most enduring gifts of the ancient world. And so the story of humanity's relationship with the divine continued, not as a fixed doctrine, but as a living dialogue between the seen and the unseen, between the mortal and the eternal. Each generation inherited this dialogue, reshaping it according to its own experiences, yet always rooted in the same fundamental questions that first arose when humanity looked up at the stars and sought to understand its place among them. As generations moved forward and civilizations matured, the understanding of the divine continued to deepen, shaped not only by faith, but by accumulated experience. The gods were no longer perceived solely as distant architects of creation. They became active participants in the unfolding story of humanity, bound by a complex relationship of obligation, expectation, and consequence. This relationship formed the foundation of social order, moral reasoning, and collective identity. Humanity's growing awareness of time played a crucial role in this transformation. The past was no longer a distant blur, but a living presence preserved through memory, ritual, and record. People began to understand themselves as part of an unbroken continuum stretching backward to the first acts of creation and forward into an unknown future. Time itself became sacred, structured by festivals, cycles, and commemorations that mirrored cosmic rhythms. The repetition of ritual was not redundancy, but reaffirmation, each act reinforcing the fragile bond between humanity and the divine. Within this framework, suffering was no longer seen merely as punishment, but as a condition of existence shaped by cosmic law. The gods, though powerful, were not arbitrary tyrants. Their actions followed patterns, and understanding those patterns became a central pursuit of wisdom. Scholars, priests, and diviners devoted their lives to discerning the hidden logic behind events, believing that comprehension itself was a form of reverence. This growing emphasis on order led to increasingly sophisticated systems of knowledge. Astronomy evolved from observation into prediction. The movement of celestial bodies was charted with precision, revealing cycles that governed seasons, agriculture, and ritual life. The sky became a text written in stars to be read and interpreted. Through this celestial order, humans perceived reflections of divine intention, reinforcing the belief that the universe was structured rather than chaotic. At the same time, the awareness of human limitation deepened. Despite knowledge and ritual, suffering persisted. Floods still destroyed crops, illness claimed lives, and empires rose and fell. This tension between understanding and vulnerability shaped a worldview that acknowledged human fragility while affirming human significance. People were not omnipotent, but they were not insignificant either. They occupied a meaningful place within a vast and ordered cosmos. The idea of destiny emerged from this worldview. Life was understood as a path shaped by both divine decree and personal action. Individuals were born into circumstances not of their choosing, yet they retained responsibility for how they lived within those boundaries. Fate was not a rigid script, but a framework within which choice and consequence operated. This balance between determinism and agency became a central theme in myth and philosophy. As societies grew more complex, their myths reflected this complexity. Stories evolved to explore not only the origins of the world, but the ethical challenges of power, ambition, loyalty, and loss. Heroes were no longer defined solely by strength or divine favor, but by wisdom, restraint, and endurance. The greatest figures were those who recognized the limits of their power and acted with humility before the forces that governed existence. This shift is evident in the way later traditions portrayed interactions between humans and gods. The divine was no longer an unpredictable force to be appeased through fear alone. It became a moral presence, one that demanded accountability. The gods observed human actions, weighed intentions, and responded according to principles that, while complex, were ultimately just. Such beliefs fostered a sense of ethical responsibility that extended beyond ritual compliance. Justice, fairness, and compassion were elevated as virtues that reflected divine order. To act unjustly was to disrupt not only social harmony, but cosmic balance. In this way, morality became a sacred duty rather than a social convenience. Over time, these ideas coalesced into a worldview that emphasized harmony between the human and the cosmic. The universe was seen as a living system in which every element had a role. Humanity's task was not to dominate, but to participate wisely. This perspective encouraged moderation, respect for natural cycles, and reverence for life in all its forms. The persistence of these ideas across centuries speaks to their profound resonance. Even as empires rose and fell, as languages changed and borders shifted, the core principles endured. They were adaptable enough to survive political upheaval, yet stable enough to provide continuity across generations. This continuity was preserved through education and tradition. Scribes and scholars dedicated their lives to copying texts, teaching students, and safeguarding accumulated wisdom. Their work ensured that the insights of the past were not lost to time. Each new generation inherited not only knowledge, but a responsibility to preserve and interpret it. In this way, the act of learning became sacred. To study was to participate in an unbroken chain of understanding stretching back to the earliest ancestors. Knowledge was not merely information, but a form of devotion, a means of aligning oneself with the greater order of the universe. As societies evolved, so too did their understanding of justice and governance. Laws became more sophisticated, reflecting an awareness of human complexity. Punishments were increasingly codified, and protections for the vulnerable, though imperfect, were articulated. These developments reflected a growing belief that order must be maintained not through fear alone, but through fairness. The interplay between divine authority and human agency remained central. While gods were believed to establish the framework of existence, humans were responsible for maintaining balance within it. This partnership defined the moral universe of the ancient world and shaped its institutions. Even in times of crisis, when famine or invasion threatened survival, this worldview provided resilience. Suffering was interpreted not as meaningless cruelty, but as a challenge to be met with endurance and wisdom. The belief that meaning could be found even in hardship allowed societies to endure calamity without losing their sense of purpose. Through this lens, history was not a series of random events, but a continuous unfolding of meaning. Each generation contributed to an ongoing narrative shaped by both divine intention and human choice. This narrative gave coherence to the past and direction to the future. The legacy of this worldview extended far beyond its place of origin. It influenced subsequent civilizations, informing their concepts of law, morality, and governance. Even as religious forms changed, the underlying principles persisted, woven into the fabric of human thought. By understanding how early societies conceived of their relationship with the divine, we gain insight into the foundations of human culture itself. The ancient belief in a structured, purposeful universe provided a framework for cooperation, creativity, and resilience. It offered a way to confront uncertainty with meaning and to transform chaos into order. Thus, the world shaped by these early beliefs was not merely a product of superstition, but a profound attempt to understand existence. Through myth, ritual, and reflection, humanity sought to locate itself within the vastness of the cosmos. The legacy of that search continues to influence how we think, believe, and live today. As the centuries unfolded, the ancient worldview continued to adapt, absorbing the pressures of change while preserving its core principles. Civilizations rose higher, cities grew denser, and populations expanded beyond anything early generations could have imagined. With this growth came complexity, new forms of governance, new social classes, and increasingly intricate systems of belief. Yet beneath these transformations, the foundational idea remained unchanged. Existence was governed by a cosmic order that demanded balance, reverence, and responsibility. The gods, once perceived as direct overseers of every natural event, gradually assumed more symbolic and institutional roles. They became embodiments of universal principles rather than constant interveners in daily affairs. This shift did not diminish their power. Instead, it refined their influence. Divine authority became embedded in law, tradition, and ritual rather than expressed through constant miracles or catastrophes. The sacred was no longer always visible, but it was everywhere implied. As societies matured, the concept of justice evolved alongside their understanding of divine order. Justice was no longer solely the punishment of wrongdoing, but the restoration of balance. Courts emerged as sacred spaces where disputes were settled not merely by force or decree, but through established procedures believed to reflect cosmic fairness. Judges acted not simply as arbiters, but as interpreters of divine intent, responsible for maintaining harmony within the human realm. This shift had profound consequences for how people understood themselves and their obligations. Individuals were no longer defined solely by their relationship to the gods, but also by their responsibilities to one another. Community became central to identity. The well-being of the individual was inseparable from the well-being of the whole. This sense of collective responsibility reinforced social cohesion and discouraged actions that threatened communal stability. Yet even as social structures solidified, the unpredictability of life remained a constant presence. Droughts, plagues, and wars continued to test human resilience. In response, people turned increasingly inward, seeking meaning not only through ritual, but through reflection. Wisdom literature emerged, exploring themes of suffering, fate, and the limits of human understanding. These texts did not offer simple answers but invited contemplation, acknowledging that some aspects of existence lay beyond human comprehension. This period saw the emergence of a more introspective spirituality. Individuals began to grapple with questions of personal virtue, moral responsibility, and the nature of happiness. The focus shifted from appeasing gods through ritual alone to cultivating inner qualities such as humility, patience, and integrity. While the divine remained central, the path to harmony was increasingly seen as an inner journey as much as an external one. The evolving concept of fate played a crucial role in this transformation. Fate was not viewed as an unchangeable destiny imposed from above, but as a complex interplay between divine will and human action. People believed they could influence outcomes through wisdom, restraint, and ethical conduct. This belief empowered individuals to take responsibility for their lives while still acknowledging the limits imposed by cosmic order. As societies grew more interconnected through trade and conquest, cultural exchange further enriched these ideas. Myths and beliefs merged, creating layered traditions that reflected diverse perspectives. Despite regional differences, common themes persisted: the struggle between order and chaos, the pursuit of justice, and the search for meaning in a vast and uncertain world. The role of education became increasingly significant. Knowledge was no longer confined to the elite. It became a means of preserving cultural continuity. Schools trained scribes not only in writing, but in moral reasoning, history, and cosmology. Through education, values were transmitted across generations, ensuring continuity in thought and practice. This intellectual tradition fostered a growing awareness of time as a continuum. The past was not merely remembered, it was studied and interpreted. The future, though uncertain, was approached with a sense of responsibility rooted in historical understanding. This temporal awareness deepened the human sense of purpose and continuity. Religion, philosophy, and governance remained intertwined, but their boundaries grew more defined. The gods retained their central place, yet human agency gained greater recognition. People began to see themselves not merely as subjects of divine will, but as participants in an ongoing cosmic narrative. This shift had profound implications for personal identity. Individuals were no longer defined solely by their relationship to the divine or their place in society, but also by their moral character and choices. Life became a journey shaped by decisions, each carrying consequences that extended beyond the individual to the broader community. The enduring power of these ideas lay in their adaptability. As cultures changed, the underlying principles could be reinterpreted without losing their essence. The belief in order, responsibility, and meaning remained relevant even as specific myths evolved or faded. Through centuries of transformation, these foundational concepts continued to guide human thought. They influenced laws, ethics, art, and governance, shaping civilizations long after the original myths had faded from popular memory. The ancient understanding of the cosmos as an interconnected whole remained embedded in the collective consciousness. In this way, the legacy of early beliefs extended far beyond their original context. They provided a framework for grappling with the fundamental questions of existence. Why are we here? How should we live? What gives life meaning? These questions, first articulated in the earliest civilizations, continue to resonate across time. As humanity moved forward, the stories and ideas inherited from antiquity served as both anchors and guideposts. They offered continuity in a changing world, reminding each generation that it was part of a larger story stretching back to the dawn of civilization. The enduring power of these beliefs lies not in their literal details, but in their capacity to express universal truths. Through myth, ritual, and reflection, ancient cultures articulated insights about human nature that remain relevant today. Their legacy is not confined to the past, but lives on in the ways we think, believe, and understand our place in the world. In this enduring dialogue between past and present, the ancient worldview continues to speak. It reminds us that civilization is not merely a collection of achievements, but a shared effort to find meaning in existence. Through struggle, creativity, and reflection, humanity continues the work begun by those who first sought to understand the forces shaping their world. Thus, the story of humanity's relationship with the divine is not a closed chapter, but an ongoing conversation. Each generation adds its voice, shaped by its own experiences and challenges. And through this continuous exchange, the ancient wisdom endures, guiding humanity as it navigates the complexities of an ever-changing world. As centuries turned into millennia, the memory of the ancient gods did not fade but transformed, adapting to new social realities and evolving worldviews. The divine presence that once ruled every aspect of daily life gradually shifted from direct intervention to symbolic guidance. Humanity began to internalize the principles once attributed to divine command, embedding them within moral systems, laws, and philosophical reflection. What had once been enforced by fear of divine retribution became sustained by tradition, conscience, and collective identity. This transformation did not diminish the power of the gods. Rather, it redefined their role. The sacred moved inward. Where once people sought signs in thunder or flood, they now sought meaning in conscience, justice, and communal harmony. The gods became ideals as much as entities, representations of order, wisdom, and moral truth. Their stories continued to shape values, but their presence was increasingly understood as woven into the fabric of existence rather than imposed from above. As societies matured, the concept of law evolved beyond simple obedience to divine command. Legal systems grew more sophisticated, reflecting an understanding that justice required consistency, proportionality, and reason. Laws were no longer merely decrees from divine authority, but frameworks through which human communities could govern themselves responsibly. This shift marked a critical moment in the development of civilization. the recognition that ethical order could be sustained through human agency, guided by inherited wisdom. The preservation of knowledge became a sacred duty. Scribes and scholars emerged as custodians of collective memory, dedicating their lives to copying, interpreting, and transmitting texts across generations. In doing so, they preserved not only information but identity. Each tablet, inscription, or manuscript represented a link in an unbroken chain connecting past, present, and future. Education gained new significance as a means of shaping character and preserving social order. Learning was no longer confined to ritual instruction. It encompassed history, mathematics, astronomy, and moral reasoning. Through education, individuals were prepared to assume their roles within society, carrying forward the values that sustained civilization. The written word transformed human consciousness. It allowed ideas to transcend time and space, enabling dialogue across generations. Through writing, humanity gained the ability to reflect on itself, to analyze its own beliefs, and to preserve hard-earned wisdom. This capacity for reflection marked a profound shift in human awareness, fostering a sense of continuity that transcended individual lifespans. As writing spread, so did the awareness of humanity's shared heritage. Stories from distant regions revealed striking similarities in themes and values, suggesting a common search for meaning. Flood narratives, creation myths, and moral teachings echoed across cultures, reinforcing the idea that humanity shared a collective past shaped by similar challenges and aspirations. This growing sense of interconnectedness influenced how people understood their place in the world. They began to see themselves not merely as subjects of a single city or kingdom, but as participants in a broader human story. This shift laid the groundwork for philosophical inquiry, encouraging reflection on universal questions of existence, morality, and purpose. Over time, religious practice evolved to reflect this broader perspective. While rituals remained central, emphasis increasingly shifted toward ethical behavior and inner virtue. The divine was no longer appeased solely through sacrifice, but through righteous conduct, compassion, and wisdom. This moral evolution marked a significant turning point in humanity's spiritual development. The idea of accountability extended beyond the present life. While early beliefs focused on immediate consequences, later traditions introduced more complex notions of moral reckoning. Actions were seen as having lasting effects, shaping not only one's own fate, but the destiny of future generations. Responsibility, therefore, became both personal and collective. This expanded moral vision influenced governance as well. Leaders were expected to embody virtues such as fairness, restraint, and justice. Their authority was justified not merely by lineage or conquest, but by their ability to uphold moral order. A ruler who failed to do so risked losing legitimacy in the eyes of both the people and the divine. Throughout these developments, the tension between order and chaos remained a central theme. Civilization was seen as a fragile achievement, constantly threatened by internal decay and external forces. Maintaining balance required vigilance, wisdom, and adaptability. Myths and teachings served as reminders of this delicate equilibrium, cautioning against hubris and complacency. The enduring power of these ideas lay in their flexibility. They could be reinterpreted to address new challenges without losing their core significance. As societies evolved, so too did their understanding of the divine, morality, and human purpose. Yet the foundational belief in a meaningful, ordered universe persisted. This continuity allowed cultures to survive upheaval and transformation. Even as empires fell and new powers emerged, the underlying principles endured, woven into the fabric of social consciousness. The ancient worldview, though reshaped, remained a guiding force. In this way, the legacy of early civilizations extended far beyond their physical remains. Their ideas became part of humanity's shared intellectual heritage, influencing philosophies, religions, and systems of thought across continents and centuries. The enduring influence of these ancient beliefs lies not in their literal interpretations, but in their capacity to address fundamental human concerns. They offered frameworks for understanding suffering, purpose, and moral responsibility, questions that continue to resonate in every age. As humanity progressed, the memory of these early insights persisted, shaping how people understood themselves and their place in the cosmos. The dialogue between the human and the divine, begun in the earliest civilizations, continued to evolve, reflecting the changing needs and aspirations of each generation. Through this ongoing exchange, humanity forged a sense of continuity that transcended time. The ancient voices, preserved through tradition and reflection, continued to speak, reminding each generation that it was part of a much larger story, one defined by the enduring search for meaning, order, and connection within an ever-changing world. As the centuries advanced and civilizations continued their slow transformation, the relationship between humanity and the unseen forces that governed existence grew increasingly complex. What had once been perceived as direct interaction with divine beings gradually evolved into a deeper, more abstract understanding of cosmic order. The gods were no longer only figures who acted within the world. They became symbols of universal principles that shaped reality itself. This shift marked a turning point in how people understood both the universe and their place within it. Human societies began to recognize patterns that extended beyond local traditions or individual deities. Concepts such as justice, balance, and cosmic order appeared consistently across cultures, suggesting an underlying structure to existence. These principles were no longer confined to the realm of myth, but became embedded in law, philosophy, and governance. The divine was increasingly interpreted as the source of universal order rather than a collection of unpredictable personalities. As this transformation unfolded, the role of myth changed. Myths were no longer viewed solely as literal accounts of divine actions, but as symbolic narratives expressing deeper truths. They conveyed moral lessons, explained the nature of existence, and provided frameworks for understanding human experience. Through myth, societies explored questions that lay beyond empirical observation: the meaning of life, the origin of suffering, and the destiny of the soul. This shift did not diminish the power of the sacred. Rather, it elevated it. The divine became less about intervention and more about principle. Order, justice, and harmony were understood as reflections of a higher reality that humans could strive to emulate. In this way, spirituality became increasingly internalized, emphasizing personal responsibility and ethical conduct. The evolution of thought also influenced how time was perceived. Early societies often viewed time as cyclical, reflecting the rhythms of nature and the recurring patterns of life. Over time, however, a more linear understanding emerged. History came to be seen as a progression with direction and purpose, moving toward fulfillment or completion. This shift allowed for the idea of progress, of learning from the past to shape a better future. With this new perspective came a deeper sense of accountability. Actions were no longer isolated events, but part of an ongoing narrative with lasting consequences. Human choices contributed to the unfolding of history, shaping not only individual destinies, but the fate of entire communities. This awareness fostered a sense of responsibility that transcended immediate circumstances. As societies matured, they developed increasingly sophisticated systems of governance rooted in ethical principles. Laws were codified not merely to maintain order, but to reflect ideals of fairness and justice. Leadership was expected to embody moral integrity, serving as a model for the community. Though reality often fell short of these ideals, their presence influenced the direction of social development. Education became a central pillar of this evolving worldview. Knowledge was no longer restricted to ritual or tradition, but expanded to include philosophy, science, and critical inquiry. Scholars sought to understand not only how the world functioned, but why it existed at all. This intellectual curiosity fostered innovation and creativity, laying the groundwork for future advancements. At the same time, reverence for the past remained strong. Ancient texts and traditions were preserved with care, revered as sources of wisdom. They provided continuity in a changing world, linking generations through shared understanding. This balance between innovation and tradition allowed societies to adapt without losing their identity. The concept of morality also underwent refinement. Rather than being imposed solely by divine command, ethical principles increasingly reflected human empathy and rational consideration. Concepts such as fairness, compassion, and responsibility gained prominence, shaping social norms and expectations. This moral evolution did not reject the divine, but integrated it into a more nuanced understanding of human behavior. As these ideas spread, they influenced how individuals perceived their own worth and purpose. People began to see themselves as active participants in shaping their destiny, capable of moral choice and self-reflection. This sense of agency empowered individuals to seek meaning beyond mere survival, fostering creativity, innovation, and philosophical inquiry. The relationship between humanity and the cosmos thus became one of dialogue rather than submission. While the universe remained vast and mysterious, it was no longer wholly inscrutable. Through reason, observation, and reflection, humans believed they could glimpse the underlying order governing all things. This evolving worldview also transformed conceptions of the afterlife. Rather than focusing solely on fear or reward, many traditions emphasized continuity, an enduring connection between the living and those who came before. Memory, legacy, and influence became forms of immortality, ensuring that one's actions resonated beyond a single lifetime. As civilizations expanded and interacted, these ideas spread across cultures, influencing diverse traditions while adapting to local contexts. Though expressed differently, the core themes remained consistent: the pursuit of meaning, the quest for harmony, and the recognition of humanity's place within a greater whole. The resilience of these concepts lies in their universality. They speak to fundamental aspects of the human condition: our capacity for reason, our longing for purpose, and our desire to understand the forces that shape our existence. Across time and geography, these themes have resonated because they address questions that remain eternally relevant. In the face of uncertainty, humanity has repeatedly turned to these enduring principles for guidance. They have offered comfort in times of upheaval and inspiration in moments of creation. Through them, generations have found ways to make sense of the world and their role within it. Thus, the legacy of ancient thought continues to influence modern consciousness. The questions posed long ago still echo in contemporary discourse, reminding us that while societies change, the fundamental human quest for meaning endures. The ancient vision of a universe governed by order, purpose, and interconnectedness remains a powerful framework through which to understand our place in the cosmos. In embracing this legacy, humanity affirms its continuity with the past and its responsibility to the future. The story that began with early reflections on existence continues to unfold, shaped by each generation's efforts to comprehend and contribute to the vast tapestry of life. Through this ongoing journey, the wisdom of the ancients lives on, guiding the ever-evolving human story. As the ancient world continued to evolve, the accumulated weight of its ideas shaped not only institutions, but the inner lives of those who inherited them. The concept of order, once understood as an external force imposed by divine beings, gradually became internalized as a moral compass guiding human behavior. This transition marked a profound shift in how individuals perceived responsibility, purpose, and destiny. The gods remained powerful, but the space between divine will and human action grew increasingly complex. In this evolving worldview, human agency took on greater significance. People came to understand that while cosmic forces governed the structure of existence, daily life was shaped by choices, conduct, and intention. Ethical behavior was no longer seen merely as obedience to divine command, but as participation in a greater moral order. To act justly was to align oneself with the fundamental principles that sustained the universe. This understanding influenced how communities organized themselves. Social harmony was regarded as a reflection of cosmic harmony. Laws were not merely tools of control, but expressions of a deeper order that bound individuals together. Justice was seen as restorative rather than punitive, aiming to restore balance rather than simply punish wrongdoing. This perspective fostered a sense of collective responsibility, where each person's actions contributed to the stability of the whole. The role of the individual within this framework grew more nuanced. Identity was no longer defined solely by one's place in a rigid hierarchy, but by one's conduct and contributions. Wisdom, integrity, and self-restraint became virtues to be cultivated. In this way, moral development became a lifelong pursuit, shaping character as much as destiny. The notion of time also underwent transformation. Instead of viewing existence as a repetitive cycle, people increasingly perceived history as a meaningful progression. Events were connected through cause and consequence, forming a narrative that linked past, present, and future. This emerging sense of historical continuity fostered a deeper awareness of legacy and responsibility. Memory played a crucial role in this process. Collective remembrance preserved the lessons of past generations, allowing societies to learn from both triumphs and failures. Through storytelling, ritual, and written records, experiences were transformed into shared wisdom. This continuity provided stability in the face of change, anchoring communities in a shared understanding of their origins and purpose. As human societies expanded, interactions between cultures became more frequent. Trade, migration, and conquest facilitated the exchange of ideas, beliefs, and values. Through these encounters, different traditions influenced one another, blending into new forms while retaining elements of their origins. This cultural exchange enriched intellectual life, encouraging reflection on universal questions of existence. The synthesis of diverse perspectives led to more sophisticated views of the divine. Rather than a single, localized power, the divine was increasingly seen as a unifying principle underlying all reality. This concept allowed for greater inclusivity, enabling different cultures to recognize aspects of their own beliefs in those of others. The sacred became less confined to specific places or forms and more accessible through contemplation and ethical living. With this shift came a deeper appreciation for the inner life. Spirituality became less about external ritual and more about inner transformation. Self-awareness, introspection, and moral refinement gained prominence as paths toward understanding the divine. This inward turn encouraged individuals to seek meaning within themselves as well as in the world around them. Education played a central role in this transformation. Learning was not limited to practical skills, but extended to philosophy, ethics, and the study of human nature. Schools and centers of learning became spaces where ideas were debated, refined, and transmitted across generations. Through education, societies cultivated critical thinking and a sense of shared intellectual heritage. As knowledge expanded, so did the awareness of human limitations. Despite advances in understanding, many questions remained unanswered. The mysteries of existence, birth, death, consciousness, continue to elude complete explanation. Rather than discouraging inquiry, this recognition deepened respect for the unknown and reinforced the humility necessary for continued growth. The interplay between certainty and uncertainty became a defining feature of human thought. While certain principles provided stability, the acceptance of mystery allowed for openness and adaptability. This balance enabled cultures to evolve without losing their foundational values. In this context, the role of tradition took on renewed significance. Tradition was no longer a static inheritance, but a living dialogue between past and present. It offered continuity while allowing for reinterpretation. Through this dynamic process, societies preserved their identity while adapting to changing circumstances. The enduring influence of ancient wisdom can be seen in its capacity to inform ethical reflection across generations. Concepts such as justice, compassion, and responsibility have persisted because they address fundamental aspects of human existence. They provide guidance in navigating complexity and uncertainty, offering a moral compass amid change. As civilizations progressed, these foundational ideas continued to shape institutions, laws, and cultural norms. Even as new technologies and philosophies emerged, the underlying principles remained relevant, reminding humanity of its shared heritage and common aspirations. The story of human development, then, is not merely one of technological advancement, but of moral and intellectual evolution. It is a story of humanity's ongoing effort to understand itself and its place within a vast and intricate universe. Through reflection, dialogue, and adaptation, Each generation contributes to this unfolding narrative. In embracing this legacy, humanity affirms its capacity for growth and understanding. The ancient insights that once guided early civilizations continue to resonate, offering wisdom that transcends time. They remind us that progress is not solely measured by material achievement, but by the depth of our understanding and the integrity of our actions. As the journey continues, the lessons of the past remain essential companions. They challenge us to reflect, to question, and to strive for harmony within ourselves and with the world around us. In this ongoing pursuit, the ancient and the modern converge, revealing a shared quest for meaning that defines the human experience across ages. As civilizations matured and their philosophical traditions deepened, the relationship between humanity and the forces that shaped existence entered a new phase of understanding. No longer defined solely by reverence or fear, this relationship evolved into one of contemplation, interpretation, and ethical responsibility. The ancient realization that the universe operated according to discernible principles became a foundation upon which complex systems of thought were built. These systems did not deny the presence of the divine, but sought to understand its role within a structured, intelligible cosmos. With the growth of cities and the expansion of knowledge, people began to perceive order not only in the heavens, but also in human affairs. The idea that society itself reflected cosmic harmony gained prominence. Laws, customs, and moral expectations were seen as earthly expressions of a greater universal order. To live rightly was to live in alignment with that order, maintaining balance within oneself and within the community. This worldview encouraged a shift in how authority was understood. Power was no longer justified solely by divine favoritism or inherited status, but increasingly by wisdom, justice, and the ability to uphold communal well-being. Leaders were expected to embody moral integrity, serving as stewards rather than masters. Their legitimacy depended not only on tradition, but on their capacity to maintain harmony between people, nature, and the unseen forces believed to govern existence. As societies became more reflective, they began to question the nature of human suffering and moral failure. If the universe was ordered, why did injustice persist? This question gave rise to deeper philosophical inquiry. Rather than attributing all misfortune to divine anger, thinkers began to explore human responsibility, recognizing that choices and actions carried consequences beyond immediate circumstances. This shift marked a growing awareness of moral agency. The concept of inner accountability gained importance. Individuals were encouraged to cultivate virtues such as wisdom, restraint, compassion, and honesty. These qualities were seen not merely as social ideals, but as essential to maintaining harmony within oneself and with the wider world. Moral excellence became a form of spiritual alignment, a way of living in accordance with the underlying order of existence. This ethical evolution influenced how societies approached law and governance. Justice was no longer defined solely by punishment, but by restoration and balance. Laws aimed to correct wrongdoing, preserve harmony, and prevent future disorder. The emphasis moved from retribution toward responsibility, reflecting a deeper understanding of human behavior and social cohesion. In parallel, the role of education expanded beyond practical instruction. Learning became a means of moral and intellectual refinement. Through study, individuals gained insight into the nature of reality and their place within it. Schools and centers of learning served as spaces for contemplation, debate, and the transmission of ethical values. Knowledge was revered not merely for its utility, but for its capacity to elevate the human spirit. This period also saw a growing awareness of the interconnectedness of all life. Human actions were understood to have consequences extending beyond immediate circumstances, affecting communities, environments, and future generations. This recognition fostered a sense of responsibility that transcended personal interest, encouraging consideration of the collective good. As these ideas matured, they shaped cultural expressions such as literature, art, and philosophy. Stories and symbols conveyed moral truths, illustrating the consequences of virtue and vice. Through narrative, abstract principles were made accessible, allowing individuals to internalize complex ideas about justice, duty, and the nature of existence. The relationship between humanity and the cosmos was increasingly framed as a partnership rather than a hierarchy. While the divine remained a source of ultimate authority, humans were seen as active participants in the unfolding of order. This partnership required discernment, humility, and continuous effort to align human actions with universal principles. Such perspectives fostered resilience in the face of adversity. Even amid hardship, individuals could find meaning by understanding their struggles as part of a larger pattern. Suffering, though painful, was not meaningless. It was integrated into a broader narrative of growth and transformation. Over time, these ideas contributed to a more nuanced conception of fate. Rather than viewing destiny as fixed and unchangeable, people began to see it as shaped by choices made within given constraints. Freedom and responsibility became intertwined, reinforcing the belief that individuals played an active role in shaping their lives and communities. This evolving worldview also influenced how people related to the past. History was no longer seen merely as a record of events, but as a repository of wisdom. By studying the successes and failures of those who came before, individuals could learn how to navigate their own challenges. Memory became a moral resource, guiding present action and informing future decisions. The enduring appeal of these ideas lies in their capacity to reconcile order and freedom, tradition and innovation. They offered a framework that acknowledged the complexity of existence without surrendering to chaos or despair. Through this lens, life was understood as a continuous process of learning, adaptation, and moral growth. As societies carried these principles forward, they laid the groundwork for later philosophical and spiritual developments. The questions first explored in ancient times about justice, purpose, and the nature of reality continued to inspire reflection and debate. Each generation reinterpreted them in light of new experiences, ensuring their relevance across ages. In this way, the legacy of early thought transcended its historical context. It became a living tradition, continually reshaped by those who inherited it. The ancient pursuit of meaning did not end with the decline of early civilizations. It evolved, influencing subsequent cultures and shaping the intellectual heritage of humanity. Ultimately, the enduring power of these ideas lies in their universality. They speak to fundamental aspects of the human condition that transcend time and place. Through them, humanity has sought to understand its origins, its responsibilities, and its destiny within a vast and mysterious cosmos. The journey of thought that began in the earliest civilizations continues to unfold, inviting each generation to reflect, question, and contribute. In this ongoing process, the wisdom of the past remains a guiding force, reminding humanity of its shared quest for meaning, order, and understanding in an ever-changing world. As civilizations continued to evolve, the accumulated weight of human experience began to shape a deeper understanding of continuity, an awareness that history was not merely a sequence of events, but a living current flowing through time. Each generation inherited not only land and traditions, but also the unresolved questions, struggles, and aspirations of those who came before. In this way, humanity became both the product and the steward of its own past. The memory of earlier ages was preserved not only through written records, but through ritual, story, and shared identity. These mechanisms ensured that knowledge endured even when empires fell or languages changed. The preservation of memory became a sacred responsibility, a form of guardianship over the collective soul of civilization. Forgetting was not merely a loss of information, but a severing of connection to meaning itself. As societies matured, they developed increasingly sophisticated ways to interpret their history. Events were no longer seen as isolated occurrences, but as part of broader patterns. Triumphs and disasters alike were understood within a framework of cause and consequence. This perspective allowed people to find coherence in the rise and fall of nations, reinforcing the belief that existence followed an intelligible order. The concept of continuity extended beyond political or cultural identity. It encompassed the moral dimension of human life. Actions taken in the present were believed to reverberate through time, shaping the conditions faced by future generations. This awareness fostered a sense of responsibility that transcended individual lifespan. To act unjustly was not merely a personal failing, but a disruption of the moral fabric that bound society together. This growing consciousness influenced how communities approached leadership. Leaders were increasingly judged not only by their immediate success, but by the long-term consequences of their decisions. Wisdom, restraint, and foresight became essential virtues. A ruler's legacy was measured by stability, prosperity, and the moral integrity of the society left behind. Such ideals gave rise to an evolving concept of stewardship. Humanity began to see itself as a caretaker rather than a conqueror of the world. The land, the people, and even the social order were viewed as trusts to be preserved and improved for future generations. This shift encouraged sustainable practices and a respect for natural rhythms, reinforcing the interconnectedness of all life. As this perspective deepened, the understanding of time itself transformed. Time was no longer experienced solely as a linear progression, but as a continuum linking past, present, and future. Events were meaningful not only for their immediate impact, but for how they resonated across generations. This sense of temporal continuity fostered patience and foresight, qualities essential for long-term stability. The relationship between humanity and the cosmos was similarly reinterpreted. The universe was no longer seen as an unpredictable force, but as a structured reality governed by principles that could be understood, if not fully mastered. This belief encouraged inquiry and observation, laying the groundwork for systematic approaches to knowledge. As people observed patterns in nature, cycles of growth and decay, movement of celestial bodies, rhythms of life, they began to see these patterns as expressions of a deeper order. Understanding these patterns became a way to align human activity with cosmic harmony. In this alignment, people found meaning and a sense of belonging within a vast interconnected system. This evolving worldview fostered humility, recognizing the immensity of the cosmos and the limits of human understanding, tempered arrogance and encouraged reflection. At the same time, it inspired awe and curiosity, motivating individuals to seek wisdom and understanding beyond immediate experience. The development of ethical thought mirrored this expanding awareness. Moral principles were no longer viewed solely as commands imposed from above, but as reflections of universal truths accessible through reason and experience. Ethical behavior became a means of participating in the greater order, aligning personal actions with the rhythms of the universe. In this context, community life took on heightened significance. Cooperation, empathy, and mutual responsibility were recognized as essential for collective well-being. Social bonds were strengthened by shared values and mutual dependence, reinforcing the idea that individual fulfillment was inseparable from communal harmony. Education played a crucial role in transmitting these values. Through instruction, storytelling, and example, each generation imparted its understanding of the world to the next. Learning became a sacred duty, a way of preserving the accumulated wisdom of humanity and ensuring its continued relevance. As civilizations encountered one another, ideas were exchanged and transformed. Different cultures contributed unique perspectives, enriching the collective understanding of existence. This exchange fostered adaptability and innovation, allowing societies to respond creatively to new challenges. Despite the diversity of cultural expressions, certain themes remained constant: the search for meaning, the pursuit of justice, and the desire to live in harmony with both nature and one another. These enduring concerns formed a common thread, linking disparate traditions across time and space. The recognition of shared humanity gradually emerged from this interplay of ideas. Differences in language, custom, and belief were acknowledged, yet underlying similarities in human experience became increasingly apparent. This awareness laid the groundwork for broader concepts of human dignity and universal values. As history unfolded, these foundational ideas continued to evolve, influencing philosophical thought, ethical systems, and social institutions. They shaped the way people understood authority, responsibility, and the nature of existence itself. Through adaptation and reinterpretation, they remained relevant in changing contexts. The enduring legacy of these early insights lies in their capacity to inspire reflection and guide behavior across generations. They offer a framework for understanding the complexities of life, encouraging individuals to seek balance, wisdom, and compassion in their actions. In embracing this legacy, humanity affirms its connection to a long continuum of thought and experience. Each generation inherits not only the achievements of the past, but also the responsibility to contribute to the ongoing story of human understanding. The ancient insights that once guided early civilizations continue to resonate, reminding us that the search for meaning is a shared human endeavor. Through reflection, dialogue, and thoughtful action, humanity continues to build upon the foundations laid by those who came before, shaping a future informed by the wisdom of the past. As the long arc of human thought continued to unfold, the relationship between knowledge and power became increasingly central to the development of civilization. What began as myth and ritual gradually matured into systems of understanding that sought not only to explain the world, but to shape it intentionally. With this transformation came a new awareness. Knowledge itself was a form of power, capable of sustaining societies or bringing them to ruin. In early societies, knowledge had been guarded closely. Sacred texts, astronomical calculations, ritual formulas, and legal principles were preserved by trained elites whose authority rested on their mastery of specialized knowledge. This exclusivity reinforced social hierarchies, but also ensured continuity. Over time, however, the growing complexity of civilization demanded broader participation. Literacy spread beyond priestly classes, and with it came a gradual expansion of intellectual agency. As more individuals gained access to learning, the nature of authority began to shift. Knowledge was no longer confined to sacred institutions. It became a tool for administration, innovation, and critical thought. This transformation altered how societies understood power. Authority derived not only from divine sanction or inherited status, but increasingly from competence, wisdom, and the ability to navigate complex systems. The rise of scholarly traditions reflected this change. Centers of learning emerged as places where ideas could be debated, refined, and preserved. Scholars studied the movements of the stars, the principles of mathematics, the patterns of nature, and the laws governing human behavior. In doing so, they sought not merely to accumulate facts, but to uncover the underlying order that connected all things. This pursuit of knowledge was often framed as a moral endeavor. Wisdom was seen as a path toward harmony, both within the individual and within society. To understand the world was to align oneself with its inherent order, reducing chaos and fostering balance. Ignorance, by contrast, was viewed as a source of disorder and suffering. As intellectual traditions matured, they began to question inherited assumptions. Scholars compared different interpretations, tested ideas against observation, and refined their understanding through debate. This critical engagement marked a significant shift from unquestioned acceptance to reflective inquiry. Though reverence for tradition remained strong, it was now complemented by a willingness to explore and reinterpret. This evolution gave rise to new forms of thought that emphasized reason alongside tradition. Logic, analysis, and systematic inquiry became tools for uncovering truth. While the divine remained central, it was increasingly understood as operating through consistent principles that could be studied and understood. This shift laid the groundwork for later philosophical and scientific developments. The interplay between faith and reason became a defining feature of intellectual life. Rather than opposing forces, they were seen as complementary paths to understanding. Faith provided meaning and moral orientation, while reason offered clarity and structure. Together, they formed a comprehensive framework for interpreting the world. As societies grew more interconnected, ideas traveled across regions, merging and evolving through cultural exchange. Concepts developed in one context were adapted and reinterpreted in another, enriching the collective intellectual heritage. This cross-pollination of ideas fostered innovation and broadened perspectives, allowing civilizations to learn from one another's insights and experiences. The transmission of knowledge across generations became a central concern. Educational institutions emerged to formalize learning, preserving accumulated wisdom while encouraging new inquiry. Teachers assumed the role of guides, shaping not only intellect, but character. Education was seen as a moral endeavor, essential for cultivating responsible and enlightened individuals. This emphasis on education reinforced the belief that humans were capable of growth and improvement. Knowledge was not static but dynamic, evolving through dialogue and discovery. Each generation had the opportunity to build upon the achievements of the past, refining understanding and expanding the boundaries of what was known. At the same time, awareness grew that knowledge carried responsibility. The power to understand and manipulate the world demanded ethical restraint. Misuse of knowledge could lead to harm, imbalance, or destruction. This awareness reinforced the importance of wisdom, knowledge tempered by moral insight. The relationship between humanity and the natural world was also re-examined. Rather than viewing nature solely as a resource to be exploited, thinkers began to recognize patterns of interdependence. The health of ecosystems, the stability of climates, and the availability of resources were understood as interconnected factors essential to human survival. This perspective encouraged a more respectful approach to the environment, one that acknowledged limits and emphasized stewardship. Although ancient societies lacked modern scientific frameworks, their observations fostered an appreciation for balance and sustainability that resonates with contemporary concerns. Throughout this intellectual evolution, the fundamental questions remained consistent. What is the nature of reality? What is the purpose of human life? How should individuals live in relation to one another and the world? Each generation offered its own answers, shaped by experience and context, yet rooted in shared human concerns. The continuity of these inquiries underscores the enduring nature of the human quest for meaning. Despite changes in culture and technology, the underlying drive to understand existence persists. This continuity links modern thought to its ancient origins, revealing a continuous thread of inquiry spanning millennia. As societies advanced, they carried forward the insights of their predecessors, adapting them to new circumstances. The accumulation of knowledge did not erase earlier wisdom, but built upon it, creating a layered intellectual heritage. Through this process, humanity forged a collective identity grounded in curiosity, reflection, and the pursuit of understanding. In this ongoing journey, each generation contributes to an ever-expanding conversation. The questions posed by early civilizations remain relevant, inviting renewed exploration and interpretation. The pursuit of knowledge, guided by ethical reflection and respect for the past, continues to shape the course of human history. Ultimately, the legacy of these early intellectual traditions lies in their enduring capacity to inspire inquiry. They remind us that understanding is not a destination, but a continuous process, one that requires humility, openness, and a willingness to learn from both the past and the present. Through this enduring pursuit, humanity continues to seek its place within the vast and intricate tapestry of existence. As the long arc of human history unfolded, the accumulated weight of knowledge, belief, and experience continued to shape how societies understood their place in the cosmos. By this stage in humanity's intellectual evolution, the ancient divide between the sacred and the practical had become increasingly fluid. What once existed as myth or ritual had transformed into philosophy, law, and moral reasoning. Yet the underlying impulse remained unchanged, to find coherence in a complex and often unpredictable world. The ancient conviction that the universe possessed an underlying order did not fade with time. Instead, it matured into a more refined awareness of causality and consequence. Human actions were no longer seen merely as reactions to divine whim, but as integral components of a vast, interconnected system. Every decision carried weight, not just in the immediate moment, but across generations. This growing awareness fostered a sense of moral continuity, binding past, present, and future into a shared narrative of responsibility. As civilizations advanced, the relationship between humanity and the cosmos became increasingly introspective. The external rituals that once dominated religious life were complemented by internal reflection. Individuals began to seek meaning not only through obedience to tradition, but through personal understanding and ethical intention. This inward turn did not replace collective belief, but deepened it, allowing individuals to internalize values that had once been imposed from without. Philosophical thought flourished in this environment. Thinkers began to question not only how the world functioned, but why it existed at all. They examined the nature of justice, the purpose of suffering, and the essence of a good life. These inquiries were not abstract exercises, but practical explorations of how one ought to live. The search for wisdom became an ethical endeavor, aimed at harmonizing inner life with outer reality. This period also saw an increasing recognition of human limitation. While earlier traditions emphasized mastery over nature, later reflections acknowledged the boundaries of human control. This humility did not signify weakness, but maturity, a recognition that wisdom lay in understanding both potential and constraint. Acceptance of limitation fostered resilience, encouraging adaptation rather than domination. As this perspective spread, it reshaped conceptions of power and authority. Leadership was increasingly evaluated not solely by strength or conquest, but by wisdom, fairness, and the ability to maintain social harmony. The ideal leader became one who governed with insight and restraint, balancing personal ambition with collective well-being. Such leadership was seen as an extension of cosmic order rather than an assertion of personal dominance. This evolving ethical framework influenced how communities addressed conflict. Rather than relying solely on force, societies began to emphasize mediation, law, and restorative practices. Justice was reimagined as a means of restoring balance rather than exacting vengeance. This shift reflected a deeper understanding of social cohesion and the recognition that stability depended on mutual respect and shared values. In parallel, the concept of the self underwent transformation. Individuals increasingly perceived themselves as moral agents capable of reflection and growth. Identity became less defined by birth or status and more by character and conduct. This subtle shift laid the groundwork for later ideas of personal responsibility and ethical selfhood. The role of education expanded accordingly. Learning was no longer confined to practical skills or ritual knowledge, but encompassed ethical instruction and philosophical inquiry. Education became a lifelong pursuit, shaping not only what people knew, but how they understood their place in the world. Through study and reflection, individuals sought to align their lives with universal principles of order and justice. This intellectual maturation also influenced artistic expression. Art, literature, and architecture increasingly reflected abstract ideas such as harmony, proportion, and balance. Creative works were not merely decorative, but symbolic, conveying deeper truths about existence. Through artistic expression, societies explored the relationship between the visible and the invisible, the material and the spiritual. As communication between cultures expanded, these ideas spread beyond their original contexts. Trade, migration, and conquest facilitated the exchange of philosophies and beliefs, leading to hybrid traditions that combined diverse influences. This cross-pollination enriched intellectual life, fostering innovation and adaptability. Despite these developments, the sense of mystery surrounding existence never fully disappeared. Even as understanding deepened, fundamental questions remained unanswered. Why does the universe exist? What is the ultimate source of order and meaning? These questions continued to inspire contemplation and humility, reminding humanity of its place within a vast and enigmatic cosmos. The enduring power of these ideas lies in their capacity to evolve without losing their essence. They provided frameworks for interpreting experience while allowing flexibility in response to new challenges. Through centuries of change, they offered continuity, anchoring societies in shared values while accommodating growth and transformation. As human societies progressed, these foundational concepts influenced emerging philosophies, religions, and systems of governance. They shaped notions of justice, responsibility, and purpose that continue to resonate in modern thought. The ancient pursuit of understanding became the bedrock upon which later intellectual traditions were built. In this ongoing evolution, humanity demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for reflection and adaptation. By integrating experience with insight, communities forged pathways toward greater understanding and cooperation. The wisdom of the past was neither discarded nor idolized. It was reinterpreted, refined, and woven into new contexts. Ultimately, the legacy of these early reflections lies in their enduring relevance. They remind us that the quest for meaning is a defining feature of human existence. Across cultures and eras, people have sought to comprehend their place in the universe, to live with purpose, and to leave behind a legacy of understanding. This enduring search continues to shape human consciousness, guiding our exploration of identity, morality, and the nature of reality itself. Through this ongoing dialogue between past and present, humanity continues to evolve, drawing strength from the accumulated wisdom of those who came before. The story of human thought is, at its core, a story of continuity, of ideas passed down, reimagined, and renewed. In honoring this lineage, we affirm the enduring capacity of the human mind to seek meaning, create understanding, and shape a world guided by reason, compassion, and shared purpose. As humanity continued its long passage through history, the accumulated layers of belief, memory, and experience gradually reshaped how people understood both themselves and the world they inhabited. The ancient frameworks that once defined existence did not disappear. Instead, they were absorbed, transformed, and reinterpreted through successive generations. What emerged was a deepening awareness that human life was not isolated within the present moment, but woven into a continuum that stretched backward into mythic origins and forward into an uncertain future. This growing awareness altered the way people perceived their responsibilities. Life was no longer seen solely as a struggle for survival or a test imposed by unseen powers. It became a process of participation in a larger unfolding order. Individuals were increasingly viewed as stewards of continuity, responsible for preserving balance within themselves, their communities, and the natural world. The idea of stewardship replaced earlier notions of submission, reflecting a more mature understanding of humanity's role within the cosmos. With this shift came a renewed focus on ethical living. Moral conduct was no longer defined only by obedience to divine command, but by alignment with universal principles believed to govern existence. Concepts such as justice, moderation, and integrity gained prominence, not as abstract ideals, but as practical guides for daily life. The cultivation of character became as important as the performance of ritual, and inner discipline was valued alongside external conformity. This ethical transformation influenced how societies understood leadership. Authority was increasingly associated with wisdom rather than sheer power. Leaders were expected to embody the values they upheld, serving as examples of balance and restraint. The legitimacy of rule depended not merely on lineage or conquest, but on the ability to uphold harmony within the community. When leaders failed in this responsibility, they were seen as disrupting the natural order, inviting instability and decline. As ideas of governance evolved, so too did concepts of justice. Laws began to reflect principles of fairness and proportionality, aiming to restore equilibrium rather than exact vengeance. The notion that wrongdoing disrupted a broader moral balance encouraged approaches to justice that emphasized restitution and reconciliation. This perspective fostered social cohesion by reinforcing the idea that individuals were accountable not only to authority, but to one another. The growing emphasis on moral responsibility extended beyond human relationships to include the natural world. People increasingly recognized their dependence on the environment and the consequences of exploitation. Although ancient societies lacked modern ecological awareness, many developed practices that reflected respect for natural cycles. Seasonal rituals, agricultural regulations, and reverence for natural elements all served to reinforce a sense of harmony between humanity and the environment. At the same time, philosophical inquiry deepened humanity's understanding of the self. Thinkers began to explore the nature of consciousness, identity, and purpose. They questioned what it meant to live a good life and how individuals could cultivate inner harmony amid external uncertainty. Such reflections marked a shift from external authority toward internal moral reasoning. This inward turn did not diminish communal values, but enriched them. By fostering self-awareness, individuals became better equipped to contribute meaningfully to society. Personal integrity was seen as the foundation of social harmony, and self-knowledge became a path toward collective well-being. As civilizations interacted through trade, diplomacy, and conflict, these evolving ideas were exchanged and transformed. Different cultures encountered one another's philosophies, leading to synthesis and adaptation. Concepts of justice, duty, and virtue were reinterpreted through new lenses, enriching the intellectual landscape and fostering cross-cultural understanding. Over time, These shared ideas contributed to the emergence of universal ethical themes. Despite cultural differences, societies across vast regions articulated similar values: respect for life, fairness, compassion, and the pursuit of wisdom. These commonalities suggested that certain moral principles transcended cultural boundaries, arising from shared human experience. The enduring nature of these principles highlights the deep continuity underlying human thought. While languages, customs, and institutions evolved, the fundamental questions remained constant. How should one live? What obligations do individuals owe to one another? What gives life meaning? These questions persisted because they addressed the core of human existence. The search for answers fostered a dynamic interplay between tradition and innovation. Each generation inherited a body of knowledge shaped by its predecessors, yet also reinterpreted that knowledge in light of new experiences. This dynamic ensured that culture remained alive, capable of growth and adaptation. In this process, storytelling played a vital role. Narratives preserved collective memory, conveyed moral lessons, and connected individuals to a shared past. Through stories, abstract ideas became tangible, accessible, and emotionally resonant. They provided a framework for understanding both personal struggles and communal challenges. As humanity progressed, the accumulation of knowledge and experience deepened its capacity for reflection. The ability to look back, analyze, and learn from history became a defining characteristic of advanced societies. This reflective capacity enabled people to recognize patterns, anticipate consequences, and strive for improvement. Yet, despite these advances, the fundamental uncertainties of existence remained. Life continued to present suffering alongside joy, order alongside chaos. The enduring challenge was not to eliminate these tensions, but to navigate them with wisdom and compassion. In this sense, the pursuit of understanding was never complete. It was an ongoing journey rather than a final destination. The enduring legacy of these ancient developments lies in their contribution to humanity's collective consciousness. They provided a framework for interpreting experience, shaping values, and guiding action. Through centuries of adaptation, these ideas have continued to inform how people think about themselves, their communities, and the world they inhabit. Ultimately, the story of human development is one of continuous striving toward understanding, toward meaning, toward harmony. It is a story defined not by perfection, but by perseverance. Each generation builds upon the insights of those who came before, adding new layers to the ever-evolving tapestry of human thought. In this ongoing process, the wisdom of the past remains a vital resource. It reminds us that the challenges we face today are part of a long human journey, one marked by curiosity, resilience, and the enduring desire to comprehend the world and our place within it. As the long arc of human development approached its present horizon, the accumulated weight of memory, belief, and experience formed a quiet but enduring foundation beneath modern thought. The ancient search for meaning, once expressed through myth and ritual, had not vanished. It had transformed, reshaped itself through layers of philosophy, science, and cultural reflection. What remained constant was the human impulse to understand existence and to locate purpose within an ever-expanding universe. With the passage of centuries, humanity's relationship with knowledge became increasingly complex. No longer confined to sacred texts or elite guardians, understanding became more widely distributed, shaping societies in unprecedented ways. The democratization of knowledge altered how individuals perceived themselves and their place in the world. Learning was no longer a privilege of the few, but a shared endeavor, reinforcing the idea that insight and wisdom were attainable through inquiry and reflection. This transformation did not erase the influence of ancient thought. Rather, it reframed it. Concepts once rooted in mythology evolved into philosophical principles, scientific inquiry, and ethical frameworks. The language of the sacred gave way to the language of reason, yet the underlying questions remained unchanged. Humanity continued to ask where it came from, why it existed, and how it ought to live. As understanding deepened, the tension between certainty and mystery persisted. Scientific progress illuminated countless aspects of the natural world, revealing patterns, laws, and structures that governed existence. Yet with each discovery came new questions, reminding humanity that knowledge is an ever-expanding horizon. The unknown did not diminish, it transformed, inviting humility alongside confidence. This awareness fostered a renewed appreciation for balance. Progress required innovation, but wisdom demanded restraint. Societies learned, often through hardship, that unchecked ambition could lead to fragmentation and loss. The pursuit of advancement had to be tempered by ethical reflection and consideration for future generations. In this balance lay the possibility of sustainable growth and enduring harmony. As humanity confronted the consequences of its actions, the importance of interconnectedness became increasingly apparent. Environmental awareness, social responsibility, and global cooperation emerged as essential components of survival. The realization that individual actions could ripple outward, affecting distant communities and future generations, reshaped moral consciousness. Responsibility extended beyond immediate surroundings to encompass the entire web of life. This growing awareness inspired new forms of collective identity. While cultural differences remained, a shared sense of humanity began to take root. People recognized that despite diverse histories and beliefs, they faced common challenges and shared a common destiny. This recognition fostered movements toward cooperation, dialogue, and mutual understanding. The evolution of communication played a crucial role in this transformation. Ideas traveled faster and farther than ever before, bridging gaps between cultures and accelerating the exchange of knowledge. This interconnectedness amplified both opportunity and responsibility, demanding thoughtful engagement with the world's complexities. As the pace of change accelerated, the need for wisdom became more pressing. Information alone proved insufficient without discernment. The capacity to evaluate, synthesize, and apply knowledge ethically emerged as a defining skill of the age. In this context, ancient teachings regained relevance, offering guidance rooted in timeless principles rather than transient trends. The enduring value of these teachings lay in their emphasis on balance between reason and emotion, progress and preservation, individuality and community. They reminded humanity that advancement without reflection could lead to fragmentation, while tradition without adaptation could lead to stagnation. The challenge was to navigate between these extremes with insight and humility. Throughout this ongoing evolution, the concept of meaning remained central. Humans continued to seek purpose beyond material success, striving to understand their role within a vast and interconnected reality. This search manifested in art, philosophy, spirituality, and social engagement, reflecting a persistent desire to connect individual experience with universal significance. The legacy of ancient thought thus endured not as a static inheritance, but as a living dialogue. Each generation reinterpreted inherited ideas in light of new circumstances, contributing to a dynamic continuum of understanding. This process of reinterpretation ensured that wisdom remained relevant, adaptable, and alive. As humanity moved forward, it carried with it the accumulated insights of countless generations. The past was not a distant memory, but an active presence, shaping perspectives and informing choices. Through this continuity, humanity maintained a sense of identity amid constant change. The culmination of this long journey was not a final answer, but an ongoing pursuit. The quest for meaning, understanding, and harmony remained open-ended, inviting continual exploration. Rather than offering definitive conclusions, the legacy of human thought provided a framework for inquiry, encouraging curiosity and reflection. In recognizing this, humanity affirmed its role as both inheritor and creator of meaning. The wisdom of the past served as a foundation upon which new insights could be built, while the future remained an open horizon shaped by collective choice. This dynamic interplay between past and present defined the human experience. Ultimately, the story of humanity's intellectual and spiritual evolution is one of continuity and transformation. It is a testament to the enduring capacity for reflection, adaptation, and growth. Through the interplay of knowledge, experience, and imagination, humanity continues to seek understanding in a complex and ever-changing world. This ongoing journey reflects the essence of what it means to be human, to question, to learn, and to strive for meaning amid uncertainty. As long as these impulses endure, the story will continue to unfold, shaped by the countless minds and hearts that contribute to its unfolding narrative.